Joining us now, U.S. Senator from the great state of Virginia, by the way, up for re-election in November, Senator Mark Warner. Hey, Senator, great to have you with us, sir.
Thank you, John. Although, remember, it's the great Commonwealth. We're not a state. We're a Commonwealth.
You're right. We got the theme thing going. Okay, I want to talk about ISIS.
Yeah.
A gruesome beheading yesterday. ISIS saying, if you don't get out of Iraq, this is kind of a taste of what's out there. Do you think the airstrikes are working? What do we do?
I think the airstrikes are working. I think the fact that the Kurds and the Iraqi forces have retaken the dam at Mosul is a absolute step in the right direction. I think they should continue to be supportive. I think, though, the jury is out about what the next step will be to see whether this new government in Iraq, thank goodness Maliki's out, will be inclusive. So, and clearly if this, I've read the reports as well, if the barbaric nature of these individuals, and even as Hope came out earlier in the week and said, military force to save refugees and others who are being butchered because of their religious beliefs is appropriate action.
Senator, your colleague in the Senate, U.S. Senator Tim Kaine, has said that, really going forward, that the president needs congressional approval to continue these airstrikes. How do you stand on that?
Well, Tim is really, along with John McCain, has really dug into the War Powers Act. John, I think at some point there is the requirement for congressional approval. Whether we've reached that point right now, I believe it's a 30-day period. I'm not. We've seen presidential actions in the past without on these kind of limited venues without the full congressional approval. He clearly has notified Congress under the War Powers Act. I'm not sure whether the actual vote process, other presidents have clearly not adhered to the standards that Tim is advocating for. Mm-hmm. I think Tim has probably a stricter interpretation of the law than I, but I understand completely where he and Senator McCain are coming from.
Okay, Senator, I want to get to the Israeli situation. Basically, Hamas not in a position to negotiate. How should we proceed on it? The Israeli media has been very, very critical, as you know, of your former Senate colleague, Secretary of State John Kerry. Some of the things he said, they seem to believe that he's favoring Hamas in these negotiations. How do you think we ought to be handling that?
I think we have to be very tough with Hamas. Israel is our most important ally in the region, and I am very much of the opinion that Israel has every right to defend itself. We've all been astonished by some of these horrific pictures, but I think, John, you and I both know if some underground group, mob almost, was lobbing shells into your neighborhood or my neighborhood, we'd respond with all force. And I think I think this kind of lack of credibility to a degree. Hamas clearly has control on the ground in Gaza, but it's been, I think, very interesting to watch the, at best, muted reaction from the other states in the region. Literally, Egypt has, I think, been actually at least indirectly helping clear out some of these tunnels. These Hamas folks are the same folks who are the Sisi government in Egypt has been cracking down on. They're simply continuation in many ways of the Muslim Brotherhood, right, and even the other states in the region. So I think if Hamas wants to be treated as any kind of legitimate partner, it has to recognize the right of Israel to exist and meet the other conditions in terms of renouncing violence.
Senator, I want to stay on foreign policy. Go to Iran. Their attempt to develop a bomb. Obviously, if they get a nuclear arsenal, that becomes a tinderbox in the Middle East. There's now a number of Republicans saying that the negotiations we're doing with them are just not working. We need to take other action. Where do you stand on that, and what would the other action be?
think the president has said, and I believe it should be the United States policy, that we cannot allow under any circumstances Iran to get a nuclear weapon. There have been some data I've seen that has shown that some of the previously enriched uranium was eliminated or destroyed. I think there was always some, I think all of us had concern, anybody who's supporters of Israel had concern that we would be kicking the can down the road. I think there was some patience for this one short-term extension, the 4-month extension, but I would side actually with a number of my Republican colleagues if and say this should not be a window, because there's what's happening. I fear that we're seeing our European partners in this start to trickle down, so that the kind of projected limited relief on sanctions, that there's a lot more seepage going on. Now, the challenge, John, as you know, and power of our sanctions were because they were enforced with our European partners.
Right.
And, with the pressure that we also want our Europeans to keep on Russia, we don't want the sanction regime that if it ends up simply being America and France, or America and Britain and France, and not the balancing. This has been one place where China and Russia, while not fully supportive, have at least been active, keeping world pressure. Obviously a delicate matter and difficult matter, but I don't have a lot of patience for a further extension.
Senator, does Vladimir Putin keep you up at night?
John, a lot of things keep me up at night, and I really think the president should have acted earlier. I started calling for tougher sanctions against Russia in March. And I'm disappointed he hasn't taken those, didn't act earlier. Now, again, I get called by American companies who say, we understand, but if you take us out, all we're doing is turning the business in Russia over to Europeans. I think one of the things I just don't understand is why the president doesn't fast-track all of these liquefied natural gas exporting permits. A real sign we could show to Europe that you don't have to be dependent on Russian oil and gas. If we could say, hey, over the future, American natural gas is going to relieve you of this dependence you have upon Russian oil and gas. And while not directly related, I'd also build the Keystone Pipeline. Again, let's make America an energy exporter. And then that, I think, has both economic and national security implications. John, one of the most frustrating things has been to watch the kind of overly used word now. Everybody seems to use it, but it's feckless in terms of the Europeans' response. They are more at threat. Where are their memories? You see the Poles and Czechs and obviously Latvia, Lithuania, and Estonia. They are very much in favor of sanctions because they know what happened when Russian, Soviet, whatever kind of expansionism takes place. So it is remarkable if the West doesn't stand against this kind of activity in NATO, in Ukraine. What really is the purpose of NATO at this point? Recognizing that Ukraine is not a NATO nation, but still, this is why this alliance was set up in the first place.
Well, I think you hit the nail on the head. With that is what is the objective of NATO if they can't step in this particular situation? I want to get back to, what you said, which I think is right on target with exporting natural gas from the U.S., getting the Keystone Pipeline open. But President Obama has been the obstacle to that. Have you picked up the phone and said to the president, look, we need to get this stuff done because it's standing in the way of international progress?
I have made my views very clear to the White House that, this Keystone, I've made them repeatedly to the point where I've been protested against in Harrisonburg and other parts of the state for my position on Keystone. And on liquefied natural gas, and the thing that I just don't get, there are a couple of permits that have been issued. There's another approximately 20 permits that are pending. We're not going to build 25 or 30 liquefied natural gas terminals. But why should we be picking which one or not should be built? If there's not an environmental problem on these permitting process, they ought to be all expedited. End of the day, let's have the most efficient ones built. That ought to be more driven by the market.
There's about 2,800 illegal migrant children now in Virginia. What is your position with this? A lot of people feel that some of the immigration laws, specifically the 2008 law, has been exploited, if you will. How do you think we ought to be handling this situation?
I think that we need to put more pressure on Guatemala, Honduras, and Salvador to stop the flow. And we've met with their ambassadors. I've seen some of the documents they're putting out in country. Secondly, I think that addition of judges. I mean, some of these kids, you can agree that they shouldn't be coming, but if you're a 9-year-old kid that's turned himself in, my feeling is we got to have judges so that we process more, and I think many of these children are going to be appropriately sent back. I think that sends a message. I think, the challenge, again, John, I've said this from the outset, is that I really do believe the best solution would have been a comprehensive immigration reform plan. The Senate plan's not perfect, but the House at least ought to counter with something. And part of that would be, at this point, if you want to roll the fact in of the notion that we ought to look at all nations, refugees, undocumented, the same way we look at people who are adjacent, Mexico and Canada, that's a fair piece to be re-examined. But I think these kind of one-off efforts doesn't get this problem. We've got to deal with border security, but I also tell you, I've been with some watermen earlier in the week who were concerned about whether they're going to be able to get the Labor Department processing some of their workers they need for crabs and elsewhere. There's a slew of my tech companies that I get on me all the time saying, hey, we are losing jobs because we are training some of the world's best and brightest. They want to stay here with that PhD in electrical engineering that we could use that could create jobs and support other jobs. But they don't even have to go back home to wherever they came from. They just simply go to Canada because Canada's got a more 21st century focused immigration policy. This is one that I'd actually had hope that we could have come up with some comprehensive approach rather than simply kicking the can.
I want to get to the VA, the Veterans Administration. You've been on the forefront on this issue, trying to change it. What are some of the things that you're involved in, and are you comfortable with Mr. McDonald?
Listen, I thought Mr. McDonald, who was a former CEO of Procter & Gamble, was the right choice, a business guy. But I got to see some action. I mean, this is not a problem that's going to get solved by just throwing money at it. We passed $16 billion, almost 17. There are additional funds that are needed. In Hampton, there are clearly some needs for additional docs. We need to put some additional folks down and expand the clinic in Virginia Beach. There's some additional facilities that are needed. Obviously, I was at McGuire yesterday. But I got to tell you, as a business guy, the VA is a hard place to help. This is to my mind, kind of the ultimate bureaucracy. The place where we should have customer service should actually be a mantra, since we owe this obligation to our veterans. It seems awful. I think in a lot of places the quality of health care, once you get into the system, is good. But I was in Gloucester the other day with a bunch of disabled American vets, and John, I've been doing politics for a long time. I've never heard stories as heartbreaking as people waiting, sometimes for years. And, I know that I got into the legislation because the VA wouldn't accept it from me when we offered that we got a series of tech companies all around Virginia, and for that matter, around the nation, who will, for free, put a SWAT team in place, look at the 1980s software they've got, and give them a plan on how you use 2014 software to schedule somebody. This isn't that hard. And the VA was like, just bureaucratically. So we got it in the bill. If the secretary doesn't follow the law and take that report within 45 days, and so far the VA hadn't even let tech companies in on the ground to look, then I'm going to be more than disappointed. The one commitment I've made to these veterans is I'm going to stay all over this. I'm going back to McGuire, going back to Hampton. The facility in Salem seems to not have quite as many of the concerns, but we've got such bad data, such mismatched data coming out of these organizations that it's embarrassing. And my message it was not a traditional senatorial visit, was I don't want to hear any more excuses. You got to get me the right data. You got to show what you need out of this additional set of resources, and how are we going to change the culture so that the employees, if people don't use the ability to fire, which was put into this law, then that would to me would be a very, very bad sign.